Welcome back to the Sonic the Hedgehog retrospective. In the prerequisite videos, I told you all my issues with Sonic's current direction and established it as the meta era. I went in detail on what makes up the dark age of Sonic, and I discussed how Sonic evolved from 2010 to 2019. In the first proper video in this series, I discussed what made the classic Genesis platformers the instant icons they were, and in the video to follow that, I reviewed the handheld games that served as the side dish to those ones. But before we jump into the 3D games, this video will serve as a cleanup video on the rest of classic Sonic's games, most of which come what I describe as the Growing Pains era. Sonic the Hedgehog 1, 2, CD, and 3K are some of the most revered games of the early 90s. Sega finally moved past their own growing pains and landed a mascot that worked well for them. So naturally, Sonic was meant to keep going in the years to come, but before we get to that, the Game Gear platformers were not the only Sonic games to accompany the Genesis ones. No joke, the Game Gear was basically the Sonic dumping ground. The Sega Game Gear is the platform to receive the most amount of Sonic games in history, coming at 12 games. 4 of which I reviewed already, and the rest of them will be at least mentioned today. Like I said in the first video, 1993 was an interesting year for Sonic, as the Genesis did not receive a new platformer, but Sonic 1 and 2 were such instant hits that 93 was the year we started getting cartoons and spin-offs like Sonic Spinball, released for both the Genesis and the Game Gear. Of course, the only version that counts is on the Genesis, as the Game Gear one is a disaster. I've been playing Sonic Spinball for my entire life, and I have no opinion on it. Yeah, you'd think I'd have something to say, but I've never cared about pinball in my life. That's all that it is. It's a pinball game with Sonic, with some tiny moments to control Sonic thrown in. If you like pinball, you'd probably get into this, however, I don't care for it. What I do note about Sonic Spinball is that it's set in the continuity of Sonic Sat AM, and the other spin-off game, Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, is set in the universe of the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog show. Maybe the North American manual of Sonic CD calling Amy Princess Sally by mistake wasn't actually a mistake. Perhaps there was an attempt to make the American Sonic game lore universe mix with the cartoons, but that effort must have been squashed by the epic story of Sonic 3 and Knuckles. One of the most infamous Sonic games released on the Game Gear would be Sonic Labyrinth, a really short, really lame maze game. I don't think this is as much of the case now, but people used to really hate this game. To me, it's not really worthy of hate, nor anything else. It's just a complete nothing burger. The plot is that Eggman replaced Sonic's shoes with slow shoes, so he can't run fast or jump, and now he has to run through these mazes to save the day. You gotta love the Doctor. I mean, he is someone who can devise the perfect plan. Sneak into Sonic's house while he's asleep and replace his shoes. This game is really not fun, like, at all. But, actually, there is no but. This game kinda sucks, that's all I have to say on it. Getting smacked around while in Spin Dash really sucks. Sonic's run animation gets a laugh out of me for some reason. Like, yeah, look at Sonic go. And I hope I never have to play this game again. Something I've always loved about Sonic was the art direction. Other Sonic characters have designs so good that you can honestly imagine a lot of these instantly iconic characters receiving their own spin-off games, and that's exactly what's been happening since the very beginning. Sonic's sidekick, Tails, got the starring role in 2 games that diverge from the formula. Tails Sky Patrol, an endless flight game, that's what you'd call it. Yeah, I forget what the genre would be, but by those standards, it's a game. And Tails Adventure, which saw an international release unlike Sky Patrol. This is more of an explorative type game, not my kind of thing, but it's funny seeing Tails use bombs given how much people hate dummy ring bombs in Sonic Heroes and Sonic 06. Clearly this would have to take place before Tails met Sonic though, as Sonic was the one who encouraged Tails to use his abilities for speed and to roll into a ball, and actually, does anyone care about the shit I'm spewing right now? I do wonder though, was this game always meant to be Tails-centric? Like, you could replace Tails and Sonic-like assets and get a different game. I mean, after all, Mario did that for its sequel, and that's basically how we got Dr. Eggman's game, Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, where it's all in the beans.
We gotta get these beans! You gotta get them fucking beans, Larry.
This game is a Western port of the Puyo Puyo game from Japan. To make Western players want to buy it, just slap Sonic on it. Nintendo did that as well, as the game got reskinned on the SNES as Kirby's Avalanche. Mean Bean Machine is Puyo Puyo. If you are in any way good at this sort of thing or enjoy playing it, then this game is for you. Meanwhile, games like this or Tetris make my brain want to explode. Come on, come on, come on, come on. God damn it. But the star attraction as far as the character-focused spin-offs are concerned is 1995's Knuckles Chaotix, known in Japan as Chaotix. And no, it's not Knuckles Chaotix, it's Knuckles' Chaotix. Released on the Sega 32X. But what might that be, you ask? I don't like to explain this sort of thing, but I just can't resist. Around the time of the Sega CD add-on, Sega as a company just stopped making good choices. One of these bad decisions was another Genesis add-on, even though the Sega CD already wasn't that well received. This mushroom cloud of destruction attached to your Genesis like a leech, the final product being this zombie of a game console, with the promise of allowing you to play arcade-quality games in the same time frame as Sega's next console, the Sega Saturn's release. Competing with yourself and your opponents is never a good idea. And so the 32X was a flop. Not that its bizarre marketing didn't already seal its fate. Oh yes, more, faster, faster! What did you think we were talking about, you little degenerate? Sonic CD for the Sega CD became the lost classic Sonic game. The cult hit, the best Sonic game ever. The 2011 port changed that conversation, and while I don't think Sonic CD is bad, the game's quality does not live up to its legacy. But here's the thing. Knuckles' Chaotix was always in the same kind of camp as Sonic CD, as it was the lone Sonic game for the other Sega add-on to the Genesis, even starring Knuckles as a character, just going to show how popular he once was. But this game has one key distinction from Sonic CD. Despite them both being weird deviations from the core classic Sonic Genesis action, Sonic CD was actually a good game. Yeah, cat's out of the bag, Knuckles' Chaotix is a frickin' dumpster fire. But before we look at the game itself, let's first mention some of the more general qualities about it. This game marked the debut of several new Sonic characters. If you're a fan of the series, the name Knuckles' Chaotix should obviously ring a bell, as Espio the Chameleon, Charmy Bee, and Vector the Crocodile, the members of Team Chaotix, all made their debut in this game. Alongside Knuckles and another obscure Sonic character, Mighty the Armadillo, who debuted alongside Ray the Flying Squirrel in Sega's Sonic the Hedgehog, the Japanese-only arcade game, both of whom finally returned to the spotlight when Sonic Mania Plus was released in 2018. As for the game itself, it only ever saw release in the 32X, one of the few classic-era Sonic games to get no attention as far as being re-released is concerned. Like, CD got a Windows 95 port, which was the version of the game that was put on the Gems collection, which would have been the perfect spot for Chaotix, but they couldn't figure out the emulation for some reason. The 32X is put to great use to produce a great soundtrack. And colorful visuals that even put Sonic CD to shame. As similar to that game, stages all have multiple variations to play around with. And that's all I've got for positives. Not really worth mentioning the story here, because Team Chaotix and Sonic Heroes retconned this game from the canon entirely, as Knuckles has nothing to do with the Chaotix in that game, Mighty isn't a part of the Chaotix, and the team was turned into a struggling detective agency by that game. Metal Sonic is also in it, returning from Sonic CD, although if you view Sonic 4 as canon, which I try not to, that game showed Metal's supposed return from CD in Episode 2 and Episode Metal. You also collect Chaos Rings in this game in the special stage, which are completely non-existent in any element of the lore past this game, which of course also goes for the Time Stones in Sonic CD, but at least those were limited to the little planet, so that makes more sense. But enough delay, let's play this game. You might be asking yourself, it's just a classic Sonic game, how bad could it possibly be? Yeah, in fact, lots of folks were asking me where this game was in my video on Sonic 1, 2, CD, and 3K. Well, dear viewer, I didn't just forget this game existed. That video was all about celebrating why I love classic Sonic, even though I criticized some stuff in Sonic 1, 2, and CD. Imagine if we build up and build up and build up, reaching Sonic 3, praising it to high heaven, and then being like, oh yeah, and there was also this 32X game that sucked balls, and here's why. Wouldn't really work, you know? This game's main gimmick is the fact that the characters are tethered together by a ring they all hold. Despite the annoyances that crop up because of it, I enjoy playing Sonic 2 and Sonic 3 with Tails tagging behind me. And Sonic Advance 3 is still my favorite 2D Sonic game for its fantastic partner integration. But this game just uses partners as a complete pace breaker. To give the game some credit, it does tutorialize its mechanics well enough, but the mechanics are just broken and not fun to play. Like going up slopes, a time-honored Sonic staple is just a chore, as lugging all the dead weight around is such a tedious hassle. The designers clearly knew how not fun and tedious this game was, so therefore the level design is a total joke. Sonic CD's levels to heighten exploration kept death traps and such to a minimum. Now, if you didn't like any of that stuff, Sonic CD's gameplay loop wasn't going to get much praise from you, but Knuckles' Chaotix has literally nothing going for it. You just fly through these nothing stages, getting caught on obstacles at the most inopportune times. Having partners adds nothing to the game, because no matter what characters you pick, it just changes nothing. Unless you accidentally pick Heavy or Bomb, because to pick an extra character you have to do like a crane machine game. But anyway, Heavy and Bomb are characters intentionally put in the partner pool to fuck you over, as Heavy is just that, and Bomb blows up on your ass. Otherwise, Espio can run on walls, Knuckles can climb and glide, like always, Vector has an 8-directional double jump, Mighty can wall jump, and Charmy is the most broken character in a 2D Sonic game ever. being allowed to fly endlessly without tiring out. You know, I could complain about broken design like I usually do, but fuck this. This game is so boring and difficult to sit through that the second I started playing as Charmy, I knew this was my character for the rest of the game. Making stages that were once nothing stages that took forever to beat into nothing stages that take a minute to beat as you just fly up and fly down, going over the minimal obstacles that are there. All these above mentioned issues are bad, but this game also drags. Sonic 1 had 3 acts per zone, and even that got old. So Sonic 2, Sonic CD, and Sonic 3 gave us 2 acts per zone. Well, Chaotix has 5. To hide the obvious padding and recycled content, you get to pick which stage you play next, ultimately chipping away at the 25 level count, before facing off against Metal Sonic. But as far as a distraction technique is concerned, it's not working on me because of the fact that all the stages just completely blend in. It's so boring to play this nothing game, where sometimes the visual puke is so bad that I don't even know which way I'm even going, which way I'm supposed to go. Ultimately, bland bosses, bland levels, bad game design, bad gimmicks, and you get what I believe to be one of the worst 2D Sonic games in history. Is it the worst game of all time? No, but I think it's just such a soul-draining experience that I also hope to never play this game again either. Just look at this death animation. I'm done. I have gone on record to discuss how exciting the 5th generation of consoles must have been if you were a kid then. Gaming was making history right before your very eyes. That is, if you liked Nintendo or were an adopter of the newly released PlayStation. If you were a Sega kid, this must have been rough. Of the 4 generations where I'd say Sega was the most important as a hardware manufacturer, those being the 3rd gen with the Sega Master System, the 4th gen with the Sega Genesis, the 5th gen with the Sega Saturn, and the 6th gen with the Sega Dreamcast, I'd say the Saturn was the darkest time for the company. Like, they made a shit ton of mistakes that completely alienated developers with a console that was too difficult to develop for, with very little ROI, and they also alienated retailers with the surprise launch to compete with the PlayStation. Anybody who did support Sega in this time realized it wasn't worth the effort. I mean, you'd see PlayStation classics like Tomb Raider, Resident Evil, Mega Man 8, and Mega Man X4 releasing on the Saturn, but the Saturn did not receive Tomb Raider 2, Resident Evil 2, or Mega Man X5. But Capcom seriously thought the price of cramming games on N64 was worthy enough to put Resident Evil 2 or Mega Man Legends on N64, when it probably would have been an easier Saturn conversion if I were to guess. So what was Sega's ace in the hole? Sonic, of course. That was the big exclusive you could get people to buy systems for. That did not work out at all, though. The development of the Mario 64 Crash Bandicoot competitor Sonic X-treme was a complete disaster. The game looks terrible to play just on the offset, but it's one of the most fascinating stories of a cancelled game I've ever seen. Not something I want to go in too much depth on because there's a lot of great videos about it on YouTube, which you can just look up. But the bottom line is, Sonic X-treme's cancellation was pretty damaging. Not having that main series Sonic game action for the holiday season of 1996 dealt a huge blow to the Saturn. What happened instead was that Traveler's Tales, the company now famous for the LEGO games, developed Sonic 3D Blast for the Sega Genesis, an isometric 2D game that looks like 3D. Instead of Sonic X-treme, we got a souped-up version of Sonic 3D Blast for the Sega Saturn as well as the Genesis version. Unlike, say, Mega Man X3 for the 5th generation hardware from the SNES version, where the soundtrack was remixed, 3D Blast on the Saturn just has a whole new OST, and it's actually really good. Especially this vocal theme, You're My Hero. But my overall favorite of the two is the Genesis version. I'm looking at 3D Blast from the Genesis because that's the one I already own, so I don't see a point in doing anything different. The Saturn version just looks a little better, has new music, much better special stages as the ones on the Genesis are the easiest in the series, and so on. But the end result is still Sonic 3D Blast. A game that is terrible. I should mention the handheld tie-in, Sonic Blast for the Game Gear. This game blows even more ass than 3D Blast already did. This game tries to be the Sega equivalent of Nintendo bringing Donkey Kong Country onto the Game Boy with Donkey Kong Land. From what I gather, the DKL games are already enough of a bust, but here we are with Sonic Blast in this rather uninspired cover art. Like, I bring it up because it looks like an unenthusiastic attempt at faking enthusiasm. I know that makes no sense, but something about this face just really rubs me the wrong way. But yeah, you can pick Sonic, who has all his usual moves, and Knuckles for the first time in a handheld installment, capable of doing all his usual moves as well. Beyond that, Sonic Blast is a complete pile of dog turds. Don't play it. Like, look at this game. It looks terrible. It just looks not fun to play, and that's about all I can say about it. Levels feel like an eternity despite only lasting 20 seconds. Quite the paradox. So back to Sonic 3D Blast, or as I like to call it, Sonic 3D belongs in the trash! This game is fundamentally not fun to play, much like Knuckles' Chaotix, but with similar and completely different flaws. This game is so boring. Truly, this has got to be one of the most monotonous Sonic games ever created. While the stages don't have literally nothing in them like Knuckles' Chaotix, it might as well. The main objective of this game is to destroy the 5 badniks in each area, freeing the flickies trapped inside, saving the day one stage at a time. Again and again and again and again and again. But the act of getting there is so frustrating that you want to plant the controller right through the TV. First, Sonic doesn't go that fast in this game because if he went any faster he'd be a nightmare to control, when as is, he's just a mildly bad daydream. Sonic plays like he's got a stick of butter strapped to his feet at all times, making precision next to impossible, which is annoying as you have to hit the enemies in order to free the flicky. So without the homing attack shield, doing this consistently is going to be hell. The flickies also don't stay saved once you save them. Every time you get hit, they scatter all over the surrounding area, with some differently colored flickies actively trying to get away from you. So doing this, dodging obstacles, and dealing with the terrible control, and you have a formula for a fucking terrible game. Why is the game all about boring and wonky flicky collection? Well, because without it, this game would be absolute nothingness for its entire runtime. Look no further than the final level, a stage where you have to put no effort into playing it because there is nothing to distract from the barren mechanics, repetitive level design, and so on. Whenever they do try to add a little more spice to it, you get what is by far the worst platforming in any Sonic game I've ever played. Look at this. Look at this. With this camera angle, it's damn near impossible to see where the hell I'm supposed to jump, making something Super Mario Bros. 1 would consider simple platforming a hellish trial of patience. Fuck 3D Blast. This is a terrible game. Never playing this garbage again either. But we aren't quite done today. Like any good mascot worth his salt, Sonic crossed over into other genres for spin-offs. We've seen the likes of this for Tails Sky Patrol, Tails Adventure, Sonic Spinball, and Mean Bean Machine, but here are some more conventional spin-offs. Sonic the Fighters, the arcade game released in the 90s that found its way onto the Gems collection, but shockingly got an HD release for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. This is how I've played Fighters ever since that came out, and it's actually really good. Not just the port, the game itself. Don't know why they added an 8th Chaos Emerald to the lore, but besides that, the game is really fun to play. Sonic and friends want to stop Eggman and the Death Egg Mark II, and instead of leading an all-out assault, Tails builds up a ship that can only send one person and they must duke it out to see who goes. Which kinda sounds like the climax of Sonic Battle, come to think of it. Pretty stupid stuff. But anyway, Sonic, in a world well before Sonic Adventure, is already far long enough to have enough characters to compose a full fighting game roster. Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, Espio, Amy, Fang, newcomers like Bean and Bark, and a final battle against Metal Sonic and Dr. Eggman himself. Now, this game isn't amazing or anything, since when I played it I just button mashed my way through it, but it's so much fun to do every now and again if I'm bored. The music always manages to keep you amped up right in the midst of a fight, and much like Sonic Battle, which I already reviewed, the animation and sound effects just keep combat satisfying throughout. It's an arcade game. Not much I can really tell you about it, but it is my absolute favorite game of today's roster, leaving only the racing installments. The Game Gear received Sonic Drift and Sonic Drift 2, two games that do not belong on this hardware. Any charm these games might have had in the character rosters and the endings is lost when the game is just plainly not fun to play in the slightest. I mean, it's a racing game on the Game Gear, fuck that shit. But what is funny is that Drift 1 was only ever released in Japan. Drift 2 got a Western release, but Drift 1 never did until the collections came out on the PS2. But that didn't stop them from literally calling it Sonic Drift 2 in America anyway. But let's get this over with. Even though the market was still not kind to the Saturn, the console saw the release of Sonic R in 1997. Still not the hit a main game might have been, but Traveler's Tales is at the helm again, and it's a bare-bone 1990s racing game. I've been playing this game since I was a kid, and it's just kind of there. Compared to Mario Kart 64 or Diddy Kong Racing on the N64, and Crash Team Racing on the PS1 especially, Sonic R is criminally lacking in content. There are a couple modes like Grand Prix, Time Attack, and Multiplayer, but only 5 tracks to race on. 4 characters to start playing as, although never use Amy, as she's almost guaranteed last place in almost every map. I can't be bothered to use any characters other than Sonic since I won every race, so their unique abilities can't be that game-changing if you ask me. You can unlock more characters by collecting 5 Sonic tokens in each stage, which does add some extra playtime to the game as you probably can't collect the tokens while getting the Chaos Emeralds and first place in one run. Or at least, I couldn't do it consistently. But even if it did extend playtime by a bit to explore, I didn't actually enjoy doing that because the controls suck in this game. Like, turning around is such a tedious hassle that I'd rather not unlock Super Sonic for the limited benefit he grants the player. What I can tell you about this game is that the soundtrack is a full-on meme, given how the tracks are so over-dramatic for a Sonic racing game. But honestly, I don't even care. I think the soundtrack is stellar. Completely out of place, sure, but bad? Hell no. The music by Richard Jacques and the vocals by TJ Davis are absolutely fantastic. So, those are all the classic era Sonic spin-offs I cared to talk about. What makes me give this video the rather dramatic title of The First Death of Sonic? That's because unlike the mess that came as a result of games like Shadow and Sonic 06, this was more of a silent dark age. Sonic was still expected to produce quality stuff, but outside of those 4 games I talked about in the first video, and debatably the ones I talked about last time, Sonic was a cesspool of hot trash. Some amusing games came out of it, but most of the output from Sonic was terrible. But little did anyone know of the behind-the-scenes trouble that caused a post-3 Knuckles Sonic game to seem like an impossibility. I think this era of Sonic tested the brand's longevity, asking the question, could Sonic the Hedgehog survive past the Genesis? For a short window, the answer to that question seemed like it was no. As other companies were experimenting with how to bring their other more slow-paced genres into the third dimension, the mid to late 90s was just not the place for Sonic. And then what we did get was a pile of trash games that I'm probably never going to play again. Except maybe Fighters. But this wasn't going to stop Sonic Team from trying to make that vision for an epic 3D Sonic showstopper a reality. But that's a story for another day. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time.